Let's continue this discussion with Johanna Maska, NewsNation political contributor, who also was a senior aide to President Obama. Johanna, good morning to you. As President Biden speaks to the UN this morning, as you know, he's facing a slew of problems here at home, from House impeachment inquiry, his son Hunter's own legal troubles, weak poll numbers, concerns of the economy, UAW strike, the list goes on and on. Will those domestic crises overshadow the president's efforts on the world stage this morning?
Well, it's a lovely and busy morning in New York, Marky. It's great to see you. And look, I think the president realizes that there's never going to be a moment where you don't have to balance both the domestic issues for the Americans who need help and the world. You know, I was looking at how they're kind of setting up the context of what they're talking about here, and they're really going into history of why the UN was established in the aftermath of World War II and the importance now in keeping peace. And that's why it's so important to support the war in Ukraine, because Vladimir Putin is, of course, invading a sovereign territory, which is against the UN Charter. But I've actually been impressed by how conscious President Biden is of the domestic situation when he does have these major moments on these stages. I mean, I set up many of these stages for President Obama, and you have to balance the cameras on you for the international world and the audience that they're in the room, all of the foreign leaders, but you also have Americans watching you at this moment. So he has to balance that this morning, and he's got to address the concerns that Americans have while rallying support of the world for ensuring that the UN Charter and our peace and security continue.
And, you know, speaking of the Americans watching, of course, world leaders will be listening in today. Congress will be listening in. Political junkies like yourself will be watching. You know, the press, the media will be watching. But what about everyday Americans? And does foreign policy really do much to move the needle when it comes to, you know, people's votes, their presidential choices, especially come 2024?
Americans care very much about their security. And I think often people will underestimate just how much they want to know about what the U.S.'s plan is long term for any of these conflicts, where our money is going. And so I think that the American people absolutely want to know. At the end of the day, I think Americans want to make sure that their peace and security is first and foremost. I mean, this is the President of the United States of America, after all. But I don't think that those two are separate. I think that President Biden very much understands that if we aren't involved in these conflicts early in Ukraine, they could actually grow, and Americans, our military, would have to be involved in that. That's the case that he needs to make, and that his aides need to make, right? Because they are all over New York. I've seen them between the Concordia Summit, the Clinton Global Initiative, all of the various side events that happen at the UN. UN has, of course, all of the climate change action going on, and the Biden administration has people there talking about critical minerals. They have a whole team out here, and I was thinking of this, Marky. It's a shame. I remember in an early visit to New York setting up a bilateral meeting with the Russians. The world can change very quickly. Obviously, it has now. And so Biden needs to make the case that we all need to adhere to the UN Charter, keep peace and security, and stop invading our neighbors so that none of us and none of the Americans have to serve in these conflicts.
Yeah, I know. My husband just landed in New York yesterday. He said it took him 2 hours just to get from JFK to his hotel, just because of how many people, different delegations are there. And lastly, I know you mentioned you've had firsthand experience in setting up these speeches yourself. How will you be watching today? What notes are you hoping that President Biden hits in order to prove that he's still the leader of the free world?
Yeah, I am watching particularly how he's going to address the American people on this stage. You are right. There are so many foreign delegations in that room. You have to address them. But this is an election year. Marky, we know that if he doesn't address those concerns of the Americans who are upset that so many of their dollars are going into this and rally the world to that support, it's a missed opportunity. So let's hope that our president is able to deliver on those points and make the case so that the world can support the UN Charter and continued peace and security.
Okay, we will stay tuned. We will see. All eyes of the world will be on that stage and on President Biden. Johanna Maska, thanks so much.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.